time to draft triple Theros, of course. It looks like we opened Abhorrent Overlord, so it looks like black it is, potentially even mono black. This is a very strong pack. All three uncommons are quite nice. I like Heliod's Emissary the best, but my Detonator's Emissary are fine as well. Voyage's End is the best common in the pack, but looking at my personal preference, I like Disciple of Phoenix and Read the Bones a lot, which I might be actually able to table, considering the power level of this pack, if there aren't too many black drafters, of course. Apparent Overlord for us, and a bunch of good other cards in all other colors for my neighbors. Alright, Titan of Eternal Fire isn't amazing, and somebody took an uncommon out of this pack. Ordeal of Erebos is nice, but I don't really draft black in order to go for a heroic strategy. Tormented Hero isn't amazing, and the good white heroic creatures cost double white, so that's a problem. And overall, in black, the targeting aspect is just a lot less relevant. Coordinated Assault, on the other hand, is very good, but I think that black is the control color in Theros and red is the aggro color, so I don't like to pair them with each other. The best commons here are Baleful Eidolon, Leafcrown Dryad, Voyaging Satyr, and green is very well represented with Nessian Cursa and Time to Feed. God's Willing does get an honorable mention, but I think it's a mistake to take these too early, which, well, the reasons for that you can hear about in my latest opening discussion. Given that I like Leafcrown Dryad and Baleful Eidolon here, but I'm sending a green signal either way, I'm just gonna take the black card because of my first pick, and because the difference in power level is just really not great. Mogis' Marauder is a card that I first thought was absolutely amazing, but it's truly an aggressive card, different from Grey Merchant of Asphodel that works very well in a control deck, and then you just have a win condition for 5 mana. So Mogis' Marauder is a card that I've not been impressed with, which is because I draft black decks quite controlling, and that means Mogis' Marauder is not the card that I want. I know that passing it might lead some people to think that a black devotion strategy is open. On the other hand, the cards that I really like in a black devotion strategy are the other devotion cards: Disciple of Phoenix, Grey Merchant of Asphodel, and of course Abhorrent Overlord, which we already have. Nadia's Disciple is nice, and it competes with Read the Bones here. This is really about which direction to go. I'm gonna pick Read the Bones here over Mogis' Marauder, and gonna continue passing green cards. Nadia's Disciple and Sedge Scorpion are fine, but nothing amazing. So I'm gonna stick to black here, although there is a slight danger that we are going to end up being cut from the color. Doesn't look like that's the case though. Here we have Pharika's Cure and Boon of Erebos still in the pack. As I've said last time, Boon of Erebos has risen in my evaluation quite a bit. I think it's very strong in the red decks, but you usually don't want too many of them, at least not if you aren't heroic or potentially aggressive. Now this deck doesn't look like it's going to be aggressive, so I'm going to highlight Pharika's Cure here. Now I want to continue cutting the black cards, and I have no reason to move into red for Ill-Tempered Cyclops, particularly because of the reasons I talked about earlier. I think the Cyclops is better than Rage of Perforos, but I'm very happy to see a Pharika's Cure here. Steam Augury is just not very exciting, and Endroward Raptor I try to avoid. I like Feral Invocation here, but not for the deck that we are currently trying to draft. Keep in mind that every non-black permanent I play is also adding 0 to our devotion to black, so that's another consideration when drafting. Here I like Returned Phalanx, cutting black further, and Pressing Chimera is a lot worse than I first thought. It has only 4 toughness, and 3 power is actually not that much if you want to race or get in there with your flyer. And Opaline Unicorn is a card that we currently don't need, and there's absolutely 0 reason to go for a 1-2 at this stage in the game when we can have a 3-3 defender instead. This is quite interesting. There is another Mogis' Marauder in the pack, which is definitely playable and more main-deckable than Dark Betrayal. The non-black alternatives don't really interest me. Traveler's Amulet is an option with the return phalanx that we already have, but those, if we really need one, we can usually pick one up. Now I'm gonna pick the Marauder, but that's mostly for signaling reasons, and it's possible that it's going to end up in our deck. It's not that it's not unplayable or anything. It's just that it isn't the card that I want to see make my main deck. On the other hand, I know that Dark Betrayal isn't going to be. It's going to be good against me, but let's hope that there won't be many black drafters at the table after all, and then they won't have the mana to actually cast Dark Betrayal. Return Centaur is nice. Rage of Perforos still in the pack. Much of the return is borderline unplayable. So the best cards here are Rage of Perforos and Feral Invocation. Although one could argue that Borderline Minotaur is actually better than Rage of Perforos because it's just that bad. I'm gonna stick to my guns and pick the black card here. Alright, Return Centaur. Number 2 potentially. And then the big question is what the next pack contains. Because this is where we might table one of the 2 black commons that we started with. Wavecrash Triton is surprising me. Like I said, I really love this card. I think it's amazing. On the other hand, we aren't looking to be in any kind of heroic strategy. So I'm just going to keep passing the blue cards here and pick the Return Centaur, which I might regret, but I only have 1 Baleful Eidolon and I'm not looking to cast Pharika's Cure on my Wavecrash Triton. I believe that Return Centaur actually does get better in multiples, because you can just rely on your 4-drop being a very good blocker, and the milling is surprisingly good against scry effects or control decks also, although I haven't milled somebody out with it yet. I like Viper's Kiss as a sideboard card, but not so much in the main deck. But this deck can definitely use one. This is the pack with Apparent Overlord and the 3 great uncommons, but the Disciple of Phoenix and Read the Bones were too good to still be in the pack. It looks like green isn't, green is being drafted. We know that there were at least 4 good green cards in the pack, and the best ones are gone with Voyaging Satyr and Leaf Crown Dryad, but Nessian Cursor and Time Defeat are still very powerful cards. Now, considering that we are mono black at this stage, Time Defeat is definitely the best splash card. However, I think that Nessian Cursor is a lot better, so I'm going to highlight that instead. Alright, Satyr Piper is very, very close to unplayable, but I have the Nessian Cursor already, so I'm going to take the card that I don't want my left neighbors to pick. And we get a sweet rare here. Now it's Gardens of Meletis, Overlost, and the Labyrinth, because the Gardens actually have some nice applications depending on the matchup. Gonna hide this and hide this. Keep the Nessian Cursor just to be reminded of our options should we see a green card next. So let's see what Pack 2 has to offer. Alright, it looks like it's offering a Prognostic Sphinx, but also quite a lot of black cards. Grey Merchant of Asphodel, Pharika's Cure, Read the Bones, and Rescue from the Underworld. Blue is also quite well represented with Vaporkin and Pressing Chimera. The only good white cards that we've seen at all are God's Willing, the first one we saw in the first pack, and now this one. So white has been cut quite heavily from our right, but that doesn't bother us because we aren't looking to go into a black-white deck like Valentin Muckle. We are, however, interested in Grey Merchant of Asphodel. It has the higher upside compared to Prognostic Sphinx. It keeps us in a single color, and it's the card that we want after drafting black for the entirety of pack 1. I would be happy with any of the black cards. In order, I would probably pick Pharika's Cure, then Read the Bones, then Rescue from the Underworld, because we already have one of each, and then it's usually better to have Protection from Ordeals and Ringsteed Riders, as opposed to the card advantage, given how our late game is shaping up. Talking about late game, I like a Sip of Hemlock. I want at least one in my deck to have an answer to cards like Nessian Asp or Nemesis of Mortals, and the Baleful Eidolon only does so much. We definitely want one hard removal spell in our deck at least, and then Sip of Hemlock is the best choice. Of course, it's better than Boon of Erebos and Scorchmark, so this pick is really simple. Alright, we did have to end up at a pack that isn't amazing at some point. Flashmad Steed is a card that we could theoretically pick, but that doesn't offer much to our deck. Farika's Cure, Baleful Eidolon, and Return Phalanx are all better 2-drops. I like Flashmad Steed better than Viper's Kiss, but less than all the other cards that we have. The only argument to taking it here would be the black casting cost, so considering the devotion code count. I think that there is no choice not to take Nimbus Naiad here. We have a Nessian Cursor, but that doesn't really count because it doesn't make Feral Invocation better in this deck. It's just not where we are going. And Nimbus Naiad is actually quite amazing. With Return Phalanx, we have an interest in being blue anyway. Nimbus Naiad is a very sensible splash card. There's even a Traveler's Amulet in this pack, although I don't believe that there's going to be 7 picks that aren't the amulet. Alright, we have sent some bad signals, if you want, because we've definitely put people in blue to the left and to the right most likely, but I'm still happy to pick the Naiad here. If we don't end up playing it, we haven't lost much. Talking about not losing much, not losing out on much, Phallic Minotaur is the best black card in this pack for us, but Nessian Asp is just an amazing card. I think it doesn't really compete with Wingstreet Rider for best com, but it's by far the best green card. I like to pick it instead of Voyaging Satyr, although I know that there's different takes on that topic. However, we should get replaceable effects like that of Phallic Minotaur easily, so I'm going to go with Nessian Asp. If we don't end up playing blue, Nessian Asp is definitely a nice addition to our deck. Alright, now it gets interesting. In order, we have Vaporkin, should we play blue, Nessian Cursor number 2, should we play green, and then the not too exciting Blood Troll Harpy, should we just stick to black. Any black card is pretty good for us because of the 2 devotion cards that we already have. Well, actually the 3 devotion cards that we already have, and Blood Troll Harpy is going to be more consistent than one of the other creatures on the splash. Even if we pick up the Vaporkin, we would only want to play the minimum amount of blue sources necessary in order to support Turn to Farika's Cure and all the black spells that are going to be, the main part of our deck. I'm gonna take Blood Troll Harpy here, and I'm quite sure that I'm gonna be happy with it. Alright, we have blue and green splash cards, so now we could decide to take a red one, although we already know that we wouldn't be playing it. Right now, Nimbus Naiad is better than Lightning Strike already for this kind of deck, and I kind of like the fact that we have Nessian Asp and Nessian Cursor. Looking at Ferris Band Centaurs or even Vulpine Goliath to maybe extend the splash to a 3rd card is something I'm more interested in than a 3rd splash color that I can't possibly support. I like Vulpine Goliath quite a bit, but Ferris Band Centaur seems better for our mana base. On the other hand, it's so unlikely that I'm going to end up playing the Centaurs that I'm just going to take out the Ordeal of Perforos. I don't want to face it if necessary, so I think taking that out weakens a deck that might have a good matchup against me. Not an easy pick. Not exactly sure what the optimum would have been there, but at least we won't be losing to Ordeal of Perforos. Return Phalanx is a very welcome addition. Passing a Stonechuck Giant, pain to play against, but otherwise not an interesting pack. We are seeing the 2nd Warrior's Lesson, I think. One of them foiled, so should we face a green deck, we can see if it shows up and if there might be 2 in the opponent's deck. Viper's Kiss, Fade into Antiquity, Mnemonic Wall. We do have 2 Phalanx already and a Nimbus Naiad, so picking Mnemonic Wall with Farika's Cure, Read the Bones, and the Sip of Hemlock that we prioritized early on sounds like a good decision to me. I don't think that Fade into Antiquity is of high importance. Rescue from the Underworld tabled, so that was actually another reason to pick Mnemonic Wall, giving us a nice late game oriented combo finish in the 5-drop slot. Even though Rescue from the Underworld does exile itself, it's still very good with Mnemonic Wall. And then I think we are just going to try to continue with that theme. Don't think that I need Bronze Sable, and we might play 2 Mnemonic Waltz, who knows. Not looking forward to playing this, but I'm just going to take it. Here, Shredding Winds and Prowler's Helm are the best cards. I would never play Prowler's Helm, but it's quite good against me. We even have 2 walls, maybe. So I'm going to take Shredding Winds. Take the on-color card. Titan Strength. Alright. Time for pack 3. And here we go. Stormbreath Dragon, the Mythic rare. I believe also the most expensive card in the set. So I'm probably going to take it. There is a Cavern Lampet in black, and green or blue don't really have anything. We aren't interested in the double green Centaur Battlemaster. Cavern Lampet is alright, but as I've said, not really good in the defensive deck that we are trying to draft. So I'm actually quite happy taking Stormbreath Dragon here. It pays for the draft, and it means that we won't have to play against it, and it's quite obviously a pretty good card. I don't often rare draft when I record, because I think that, taking a mediocre card that costs a couple of tickets isn't really accomplishing much, but in this case, I think an exception is warranted. Here we have Erebos' Emissary, which is great to see. Better than Lash of the Whip. We have some removal, and we aren't interested in putting too much of an emphasis on that. Whereas Erebos' Emissary fills the curve on 4, because Breaching Hippocamp is definitely not making the cut here. Can also hide the dragon. So this is good on 4 and 6, where we don't have a lot of plays yet. We have quite a lot of creatures that might be good, but might not be. So having an outlet to use them as pump spells is also very welcome. I didn't mention Voyaging Satyr here. There was another one in the pack, and that's because I'm with the 2 Phalanxes and the Nimbus Naiad. I'm really looking at splashing blue at this stage. Shredding Winds, Nessian Curse, and the one Nessian Asp don't really cut it for me. I'm not too sure if I want the Mnemonic Waltz yet. If I don't, then I will probably just play 2 Islands and a Nimbus Naiad, which is still a very reasonable splash. It won't affect our mana in a bad way, and I think add quite a lot of power level. I've talked about how much I like bestow creatures, but Cavern Lampet doesn't really belong in that class of creatures, because it's not in the color where you want to be bestowing thanks to Heroic. So in this deck, it would basically be a little better, or maybe even worse than Mogus Marauder, because of its casting cost. So it's definitely not a card that I'm too interested in. Flashmancy would be better for the curve, but I like Bloodtroll Harpy. A lot of my successful decks actually have 2 or 3 Bloodtroll Harpies in it, despite this card not looking too amazing on its own. I'm basically never unhappy to have it. Alright, here we have Nyktos, Shrine to Nyx. Actually quite interesting to make a lot of black mana with this, but our devotion theme hasn't really panned out. I'm not exactly sure what the reasons for that were, but we probably just had 1 or 2 more black drafters at the table. Given that there was a Disciple of Phoenix and a Read the Bones in the very first pack, and both of them got taken, I suppose that 3 black drafters is a good estimate. So that kind of explains why we couldn't go into a mono black strategy. I like Lash of the Whip here. I'm set on playing blue. I will hide the green just to make that clear. And I'm not going to play Thassa's Bounty, even though it's nice with Mnemonic Wall. And because we are such a controlish deck, 1 Lash of the Whip isn't going to hurt us at all. Alright, a bunch of unplayable cards and an Artisan of Forms. Don't like the Artisan particularly. It's also not really going to be good in our deck. At least, well, we do have some ways of targeting it, so it might be remotely playable, but I don't really want to play a 1/1 that I have to target for it to do much. So I'm definitely going to take it. It's also a pain to play against, but it's probably not going to be the best in our deck. Alright, this is definitely what you want to be seeing. A nice gift in a second Grey Merchant of Asphodel. Better than Omen Speaker and Triton Fortune Hunter, especially when we would have to splash the other colors. And a Crone Horse doesn't cut it for me. Yeah, here we go. We already have a Rescue from the Underworld, and we have the Mnemonic Waltz, but with Lash of the Whip, Rescue, and 2 Grey Merchants, we have quite a lot of 5s already. And keep in mind that Baleful Eidolon and Nimbus Naiad are also 5s, if you want them to. So I'm going to take Baleful Eidolon here. You simply don't want a second Rescue from the Underworld. Quite an interesting pack with Lightning Strike also still in the pack, but a very nice pickup for us. Giving us another 2-drop, another Bestow creature, and another black permanent for Devotion. Featherlight Minotaur is a card that I would love to have at this stage. I will cut Mogis' Marauder for it, because the Minotaur is just better. The only thing that we are missing now is the Disciple of Phoenix, and you can actually see it in the curve here. So I'm actually extra happy that we picked up the Returned Centaur. Benthic Giant has some sideboard potential, maybe. We actually have quite a lot of Bestow effect, so it might be a good card to have. Quite a late Nessian Cursor. We have a Benthic Giant already, but with the lack of 4-drops, we might actually want to play or board in Enverod Raptor, so I'm taking that one. Flashmat Steed might actually make the deck. Good to pick that up. I've been ignoring the Unknown Shores without really mentioning it, but I almost never play them anymore. I don't really want them to fix my mana, because it's just going to add 1 to the cost of all these permanents, which is just super dangerous in a format that's so tempo-oriented. And just looking at Nimbus now, you don't want to bestow it for 6, you don't want to cast Mnemonic Wall for 6, because 5 is already quite a lot in this format. So even though we would be able to splash in a sense, I'm just going to play a decent mix of swamps and islands instead. The Hedonist looks a bit more powerful than Setter Rambler, although there isn't much of a difference. And last but not least, Asphodel Wanderer, which I actually saw in action at GP Valencia. Had never really seen it in play before. Time to build this deck, and the most difficult decision is probably going to be how many of the blue cards we want to play. But other than that, we've picked up quite a few powerful cards, and I'm quite happy how things shaped up. Now, I'm gonna start by putting the spells to the bottom to give us a better idea of what we are working with. Don't think that we want these cards, although Thassa's Bounty and Benthic Giant are probably better in this deck than in a lot of decks that I've drafted before, which could mean that we have to reevaluate this a little bit. Alright, so here we see that our potential blue cards are Artisan of Forms, Nimbus Naiad, and 2 Mnemonic Walls. The Mnemonic Walls are pretty amazing when you look at what they can get back. All of our 5 non-creatures are spells, and we want these 5 in our deck anyway, because, well, we aren't going to play 22 creatures. It's much more likely that we're going to end up with, let's say, 17 or 18 creatures and then these 5 spells. Now, we don't have any grip tides, so Thassa's Bounty isn't really interesting. It does add to the milling theme, and it's a nice card advantage card when our curve does have a hole at 6. On the other hand, this is a very fast format, and if we pay the maximum for our creatures, it's actually quite expensive already. Mnemonic Wall is a very expensive card also, because you spend 5 only to then spend the additional mana from the card you returned. So I'm not even sure if we want 2 Mnemonic Walls in this deck, given how our curve looks like. That said, I've already cut Viper's Kiss. I don't really main deck that card anymore. And Artisan of Forms is really interesting. We have 2 Baleful Eidolons. We have a Nimbus Naiad, an Erebos' Emissary, and then in theory we could also cast our own removal spells on it, although that's really unlikely. So we do have 4 cards to target it with, and we have the Erebos' Emissary as an additional reason, well, to just get rid of the Artisan, or a way to get rid of the Artisan should it just not deliver. Including Artisan of Forms would definitely be a high variance play. Sometimes it's just going to be a 2-mana 1/1, although that isn't the end of the world if your opponent plays 2/1 aggressive creatures. And in other games, it's going to be very powerful to put something like a Baleful Eidolon on it and then turn it into the opponent's strongest creature. If we play the Artisan, we are already quite restricted on what we can still play. I'm going to cut the Guards of Meletis. We have a lot of good early game creatures, and Morgus' Marauder doesn't look too bad, given that we want to play all the black permanents anyway, to give us the highest possible devotion count. That means that Enverod Raptor and the blue cards are really the weakest link here. I'm not the biggest fan of the Mnemonic Walls, and cutting them would definitely make the mana easier. The best mana we can achieve is by cutting Artisanal Forms and the 2 Mnemonic Walls, and then we actually have a deck just like that. We would play 3 islands to just make it super safe that we can cast Nimbus Naiad, basically giving us a better than 75% chance to cast the Naiad when we draw it, and having 3 sources to activate these return phalanxes in the late game is also more than enough. I kind of like that because of the consistency it guarantees, and Enverod Raptor doesn't look too bad in this deck, given that we are semi-aggressive with the 2 Grey Merchants and the flyers that we already have. On the other hand, it is a good blocker that comes down on turn 4, where we now have 5 creatures, but we do need some beef to get going. Not that this is the most beefy creature, but I hope you get what I'm trying to say here. I kind of like that Mythic Giant, really, but it's probably not going to be good enough. If we really cut all these blue cards to make the mana the best it can be, then this is probably the build that I would want to end up with. Artisanal Forms could come in as a sideboard card, but for now I think I like the black cards better. Prioritizing the consistency rather than the fancy plays that might not actually end up to be all that amazing. That still gives us quite a lot of cards to sideboard. If we play against control, we have super good card advantage options in blue. If we play against aggressive decks, we can just load up on the early game effects, and then we actually don't want the blue cards because they make it more dangerous to lose. So yeah, this is what I like best, and I hope that it's going to perform well. One island is a little bit few. We do have only 1 blue card, but the 2 return phalanxes count also, and with 3 islands and 14 swamps, it's impossible not to be able to cast Grey Merchant of Asphodel. It's impossible not to be able to cast Erebos' Emissary, and it's highly unlikely that we're going to look at starting hands that only contain islands and have to be mulliganed because of that. Alright, this is my build. I think that we've drafted a good deck, although after first picking this and getting a couple of black cards, it could definitely have been better in the end. I think that black just wasn't as open as we would have liked. Let's see how this goes.